everyone, and welcome to another episode of geNEOusChats. And thanks for making the time, Jonathan, to be with us today. Would you like to just let everyone know like a bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from?
Yeah, sure. Hi to the NeoChat audience, and great to be chatting with you, Mark and Alejandra. So I tried to make it really obvious where I'm coming from in Australia. I'm actually not in the red centre, although I have been privileged to visit a couple of times. And at the moment, I'm in Brisbane, so on the east coast, and we're doing this crazy time zone juggle. But I'm really glad that's worked out. So my background is very much in the arts originally. And then education was sort of my get a real job, which I've ended up absolutely loving. And in more recent years, I've spent quite a bit of time around the sort of future of education and futures thinking. And strangely, that's then led me into STEM and STEAM education, which obviously we're going to talk a bunch more about. So yeah, probably like everyone, you have this weird and wonderful kind of path through education. Quite a few lessons along the way, but yeah, great to be talking about STEAM tonight with you guys.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned STEAM right at the start there, because that's the first thing is an alphabet question first. We see
Sure.
STEM and we see STEAM, and your organization is called STEM Punks, right? That's who you work with.
STEM Punk's the organisation I'm working for full time now here in Australia. And the funny story is that back about 4 years ago when it started, they tried to trademark steampunks, but of course it's such a well-known generic term, you can't trademark that. But STEM was a little bit less known, and so they could trademark STEM punks. So here we are. And people ask us all the time, why are you leaving out the A? And it's like, well, let me tell you a story. Yeah, but obviously we can definitely talk about that alphabet stuff, and even at STEM punks, and with my teacher friends we talk about the other letters, etc. Quite a lot. You can add in an E for entrepreneurship somewhere, and I'm sure you guys have both got other suggestions that you can add in. My favorite one at the moment actually is a H. But that's for like humanity. That's for humanity, basically. Which for me, and we might get to this later, but for me, having been in this sort of field and education even as well for 20 years, the H is actually what the whole point of all of them is about. So maybe if we can add like a plus H somewhere, that would be that would be cool. But I know you guys might have some opinions as well on the different letters and what should be in and out, etc.
Well, it was more of a curiosity. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Alejandra? STEAM or STEM?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned you come from an artistic background, and the A has suddenly been removed, right? So that's a good irony. The E as well for engineering in many cases. And I really like that about the H, and I think it's very fair to call it that way, whether it's embedded in the word as such. Adding one more letter, I don't think it hurts anyone, right? Or also, as you're saying, maybe a plus something, or as a whole, maybe we don't need that letter to actually understand that this whole concept needs to integrate the H being human, right?
That's right.
Humanities as such. So I think it's a really great moment to start asking the questions, looking at the opportunities, and seeing where this takes us. So great.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome.
It's raising an interesting point there about the H, which is something I wasn't aware of. I always find it quite interesting that STEAM is such a force in education, but yet, we're still kind of having these discussions about, we're sharing the E, and should the A be, and, that kind of thing. And the interesting part is that it's starting, if you think about it as part of a way to kind of encourage participation in those fields, especially in cases of diversity and things like that as well, just get more people involved because of the way the future looks. But then by adding H, it seems like it's becoming more than a kind of complement or a way to kind of give these disciplines more of an elevated platform, that it's becoming more of a force for change? Like you're putting the
Yeah,
H kind of front and center. I mean,
and that might just be a personal bent, perhaps. And I have to be really honest. For a long time, from where I was, in education, I kind of looked at the early STEM movement and thought it was a bit ridiculous, to be honest. It was kind of, I guess, a bit too limited in a way. Just ST and E and M, just those four disciplines. It seems pretty obvious to me that obviously 4 is a good start, but you need everyone, right? But I guess, I don't know, I've come around to the position now. You should be interested again in your opinions. I've come around to the position now that it's almost like, actually, hang on a sec. Even the fact, firstly, that those 4 disciplines are working together is a huge win. Just like stop and celebrate that, for starters. I trained as a high school teacher. I'm not sure what it's like for where you guys are at, but high schools can be very siloed, so each subject is its own little kingdom, and they hardly ever talk to each other, to cross collaborate, even though life is cross disciplinary. So even having those 4, I actually started seeing that as a real win. And there also seems to be a thing about STEM where it's okay, or it's implied, or it's normalizing more project-based focus or problem-based, real, like solving real world problems, I guess, is also a bit of an unspoken thing. For me, that's that connection to the H. And when I say a H, I don't want to try. I have had fun chatting with friends about where would you stick the H, but probably my best way of saying it now is that it's like a silent H. It's just there and it's implied, I guess. So yeah, there's like a hidden H or a silent H in there. But the whole reason that you would want to combine those and work on problems is for the benefit of humans, basically. So, and again, maybe that's coming from my arts background. I have friends who are much more sort of a hard science backgrounds, and all they need, all they want is those hard science, sort of problems, or the hard engineering problems. They don't need to connect it out necessarily to other things, for their own personal goals. But for me, it's got to have that benefit and that wider connection. And to be honest with our work at STEM Punks, we're very much trying to broaden STEM as much as possible by focusing on that sort of problem solving aspect. And we find that you've got a hardcore of students who will, I guess, naturally be inclined towards more your traditional STEM, I guess, kind of topics and subjects. Whether that's 10, 15% of students, etc., like any subject. But when we start talking about bigger sort of themes and problem solving, you tend to be, it's much more inclusive as well, no matter what sort of people's interests and backgrounds are. So.
I think as well, from what you're mentioning, Jonathan, is that by adding the H, an A, or an E being entrepreneurship, right? Other components that are less, I would say, we're demystifying a bit the access to a whole lot of disciplines that we can access without being good at math or good at a scientific related approach. And we're making this just available for more people. And when I say more people, is even getting to want to know what it is at the beginning. You're talking about early years in school, but also making people being interested in and thinking that, hey, I can make it there. And I'm thinking of young kids by having this approach, but I'm also thinking about other kind of minorities that, if we think
Definitely.
about it, are not necessarily linked to those topics. I mean, for me, as much of a coincidence or not, I do remember at school, the big majority of people being good at math related subjects were the boys. And why is that? And why is that a thing? But then if you add the A, for example, it's more interesting for the girls, and then we can all be together in the same space and realize that, well, science can be fun and it can be accessible, and same for the creative side, and it's not a boy or girl related thing, right? And I think that's that I really like that balance by adding just one letter going to Mark's alphabet question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I was talking about STEM punks, we couldn't put the A in even though we tried. That I guess one way we compensate is by using the design thinking framework. So pretty much, I'd probably say 80-90% of the workshops and the projects that we run with students takes them through that design thinking process. And so that way they're, again, it's that embedded, it's just part of the practice of what we're doing. You almost don't need to put the A there because it's just, it's implied that you're working on a problem and you're using all those, especially the creative skills as well. Yeah.
It's great. Absolutely great.
What would you say, Jonathan, about, what you're talking about there is something that we talk a lot about in these conversations, and we write a lot about, is the future of education. And it's a lot around more transversal education, the idea of subjects siloed from each other as being antiquated and not reflective of real life, how project-based and problem-based learning and thinking is the way forward for a challenging future and all of that. And here you are, you're kind of bringing this in. That's kind of implicit in what STEM or STEAM or whatever is and how it works. It's these it's the acronym is all together. So how do you find it when you going into schools, because you're kind of inserting almost this bubble of what the future of education in my view, and I think Alejandro definitely shares it, should be like into the traditional system. And you work with a lot of different organizations, I imagine. For you, what kind of challenges do you come across in inserting that sort of model? And what way do you think that the STEAM approach works best? To embed it, to have it as something apart? Is it an after school thing? Is it embedded in the framework of the curriculum? How does it work?
Yeah, we could talk about all those different aspects for quite a while. Probably one of the first things that kind of strikes me is that STEM, now that it is kind of well known, and it's inherently valued for all the standard kind of reasons, it can be that Trojan horse, I guess. So it's embedded in the curriculum, and there's enough government initiatives and recognition, etc., that the skills in science, technology, engineering, and maths. We need more people who are qualified in those areas. Therefore, it gets put into the curriculum, etc. And whether you call it a happy accident or whatever, that thing also has that built-in collaboration and problem solving. So it can be that kind of Trojan horse, I guess. So every teacher's got those different goals, etc. they need to tick off on. So sometimes it's as simple as, let's get these guys to come in. They'll do that one thing that we can't do. We don't have the equipment or the skills, and then we can tick that off. And then from our perspective, I guess we hope that we brought a little bit of punk in there as well to just sort of shake things up a little bit. And that might be that design thinking, and even just a lot of the times it's just giving the students that chance to express their own ideas and designs. Might just be that little spark, but then we go and that's it. And other times, there'll be more where we work with the school for a few months and we get to see some of that payoff. Obviously, that's what we love the most. And we now have a pretty well developed online platform of classes as well, so students can continue there and in their own time. And if there's lockdowns, etc., as well, they've still got some of that kind of access. As far as the schools themselves, what's the best model beyond the point where they go, oh, it's in our curriculum, we better do something. Beyond that point, what they do, I'm always incredibly hesitant to say, do it this way. And that's just, again, my personal bent that, with every school being its own little community, so unique. The mix of administrators and teachers and parents and students, it's impossible to say, do it this way, do it that way. But more, I would almost sort of go back to those kind of higher principles again and say, look, as long as you're focusing on combining those, you're celebrating the cross-disciplinary nature, and you're giving students those real-world problems to solve, you're probably going to succeed, whether it's an after-school class or an hour a week inside the curriculum, etc. But it'd be much better. This is sounding a bit meta, but it'd be much better for a school to run a design thinking process on which one works best, for them. Like, that's a problem they need to solve themselves. And and it's something that quite happens. I see this all the time in education, where there might be a school who's doing some great things. Maybe they're winning awards. They're getting that kind of recognition and buzz about them for some successes they're having in some area. It could be STEM, could be anything. And other people kind of take notice and try and copy that, transplant that. And sometimes it even happens with the education departments. You go, oh, that school, let's kind of codify that, and then we'll insert that into every school now. But of course, that original school they probably spent years failing and trying different things to come up with that unique solution that works for them. And it's almost like everyone else, I guess, probably wants that shortcut. It's kind of human to want to do that. Oh, well, if we just copy that, fantastic. But I'd always encourage schools, people, etc. No, it's that journey that you go on yourself that's actually the most valuable thing. So not going to give advice on like what's the strict way, but sticking to those principles, definitely. That's
kind of a throwback to when you talk about other schools copying. It's kind of a throwback to the how the criticism of schools as being the kind of industrial revolution model, production line model, standard product, standard outcomes, and a relic of that thinking is the idea of scalability, whereas. Where you take something and replicate it and think that it's going to work in all these unique ecosystems, which of course, as you perfectly expressed, it doesn't. So we're talking really about spreadability. I've heard people using the word spreadability rather than scalability, and that seems to fit better. This kind of osmosis.
I really like that.
I also like a lot that what you are explaining, like the school that has been working for, let's say, 5 years in this initiative, and all of a sudden, oh, well, everyone gets it. It's also pretty much like open data, like how open data works, right? There's an engineer who has been working for a while, a developer, and in so long, it took him so long to actually develop something, but then he wants to make it available to the world so that the next one can complement on not doing that from scratch, but actually adding on something else. And I really like that, because I personally haven't seen that at an education admin level, let's say. And it's really interesting, because you don't need to start from scratch, and we are looking more for a collaborative approach rather than, I'm competing with the school next door. And I really like that.
Yeah, really good. No, that sounds good, Alejandra. And I like that. Spreadability is a much more human word as well, I think. But for whatever reason, I mean, in one level, and be interested in your opinions as well. The way I kind of see it historically is that the only way that you can do mass education is to do it almost industrially, or at least up until around about now in history. The only way that, if you want to bring everybody up to that common literate and numerate level, how are you going to do it unless you stick everyone in rooms and kind of like step them through? Like I don't think anyone is really at scale anyway has come up with any better way in a couple of 100 years or whatever of mass education. I think in one sense, I'm kind of past that point myself, where I'm like, oh, we must change schools and change education, because 20 years in education, I've been part of that conversation for that amount of time, and I'm already sort of going. So for me, schools actually, if you're talking about bringing everyone to that common level, they kind of do okay at that, at least. And if society still thinks that's what schools are for, apart from the babysitting, which we won't, is a whole nother subject. But, if that's still school's main goal, because we want to be able to like email and text each other, that's, we need to have that common kind of thing. It's kind of doing that okay, at least. Many problems in that industrialization because it's anti-human. It does dehumanize students, but at least in terms of that goal, yeah. But obviously we recognize that's not enough anymore, and maybe you guys will do other chats on that sort of wider topic. That we're getting a bit beyond STEAM.
Well, no, that's okay with us. We're all about big ideas, but I'm wondering about, because just it comes back to your kind of Trojan horse idea, because you've got okay, so you're going into subject-based schools, where people are doing maths in this room and English in this room and whatever, and then suddenly they're exposed to the process of discovery and iteration, and critical reflection and problem solving and all that, and you and I, I'm sure both know from experience of being in these classrooms or these environments how energizing that is. Now you've got those learners going home and telling their parents, like, wow, here's what I did today and here's what I learned, and actually being excited about learning. And the school's got to be aware of that as well. And this is what I wonder, that we're always very concerned about how to come up with a better model, but there's still that kind of idea that we have to control everything. We have to design models and frameworks to implement it. Whereas this is bottom up, isn't it? This is the learner saying, here, let me tell you how much I enjoyed learning today, and here's evidence of my learning. And that's sometimes kind of, I wonder if this is going to be part of changing things bottom up. It's possible. I mean, I'm borrowing from your use of the phrase Trojan horse, so I'm blaming it on you.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's why I do what I do. Is a big part of that hope. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Whether it happens within the constraints of standard kind of education systems, or whether we see a kind of a slow kind of phase over to much more individual pathways, and obviously talk about coronavirus and kids work, having to suddenly be at home and be more independent, and suddenly it's like, oh, a lot of this, they can actually do. There's plenty of information online, et cetera now. So that kind of phase over to those pathways. And look, it might take 20, 30 years for that phase over to happen. And that would be fairly, in historical terms, that would be actually a fairly short changeover. So, I can definitely see that happening, and for me, a big part of that, why that could happen now is definitely the technology side of things.
Yeah.
So I would love to see, AI in education be the kind of thing that takes care of all the marking and keeping track of all the different indicators, etc. It might have to be fairly invasive, sort of, audio recording and video recording, and like facial emotional recognition, etc. But if that could be done in an ethical way, taking that load off the teacher to then be able to sit down and give the feedback properly and build that relationship, and spend the human time, because the machine is doing all the robotic stuff, would be amazing. Future of education. I'd love to be a part of that, that kind of schooling thing where you're talking about their ideas and actually doing that critical thinking, not the incredibly overworked teachers, who, might run a STEM club for an afternoon for a couple of years until they, until they're exhausted, or because they've got to get back to that, to that marking and that lifting everyone to the literacy and, numeracy kind of levels. If a lot of that stuff could be taken care of, then yeah. In the meantime, yes, the STEM design thinking, etc., is a great, bottom up way to do that stuff as well. And I've really started to see STEM, STEM as, like I said, I used to be pretty snobby to STEM. But I really get now how it's the unique place that it's in, that it's kind of grown to within education, can definitely be that kind of place of sparks, etc. as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting what you mentioned around the importance of technology, not only taking care of students, but also of teachers. And I think that's very, very important to state in here, which is, how do we make the teachers' life easier so that they can make the students' life easier, right? And that's where we get to enjoy it. You said, we're bringing that punk side. Well, someone who's very much tired because they have been grading all night, apart from all of the duties that they have to do in a normal classroom, well, that level of empathy maybe is more reduced, that level of punchness, it's not always there every single day because we're only human, right? So if we really want to embed these practices and have this design thinking process flourish, then I truly believe it, as you're saying, that technology is very much demanded to take care of the repetitive stuff that can be done by a robot, as easy as that. And I do see it very coming very soon. I don't know how we can, but this is more of a philosophical question, how we can do this as well for developing countries where technology cannot necessarily be a vector to make everything easier. But at least if we can get it started from more developed countries, we can certainly have a collaboration towards the rest of the world. So I do think it's something very important to be done.